We naturally want to believe that we are living consciously and engaging in practices that foster optimal health and well being. However, the challenges and stressors of real life can easily take us down a path into anxiety, negative moods, depression, isolation, cloudy thinking, emotional dysregulation, confusion, and myriad physical symptoms, including pain. In the process, we often lose, or perhaps never had, the core healing element of somatic awareness. Yet, as research tells us, mindful movement has the power to foster lasting well being. Today, we'll focus on this listener's real life issue. I am a confident, secure woman. However, 25 years ago, I was given a TBI by a drunk driver. Since my crash, I have become apprehensive about my choices. I think brilliantly on some days, but not so much on the next. As I type this, I realize this is a not so much day. And with that issue as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Manly, and this is Imperfect Love. Please note, as this episode may contain sensitive information, listener discretion is advised. If you need support, please see the special links in the show notes.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Marie Manly, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are not perfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
Today, I'm joined by a very incredible guest, Dr. Martha Eddy, founder and director of the Dynamic Embodiment Somatic Movement Therapy Training Program. Dr. Eddy is also an author, and she has taught at many prestigious universities, including Princeton, Columbia, Barnard, and NYU. Dr. Eddy will be sharing her expertise on the healing power of conscious movement. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Eddy. It is such a privilege to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. I love your mission and just what you're bringing together for the world. So thank you.
Well, thank you for joining me and our listeners today. And before we launch into the substance of today's episode, do you mind sharing with our listeners just a little bit about what makes you, you?
Oh my gosh, that's a big question. But I think a piece that maybe wasn't in my bio has to do with my upbringing. It underlies why the form of movement therapy that I actually established, created, has what we call a social change, or now it's more typical to say social justice, but I don't use that word too often for specific reasons, component. And that is because I grew up in poverty, and a lot of people, I feel, in the United States and Canada and Northern Europe don't really understand, especially in the somatic field or in the wellness field, how poverty impacts health. And so that's a big part of what motivates me to do my work and impacts how I do my work and how I make it as available as possible to diverse people. And yeah, that's part of who I am.
Thank you for sharing that. And I hope we can weave in that piece. In fact, let's make a point of weaving in that piece in the podcast so that our listeners are more aware of how poverty does impact overall well-being. And I join with you on that. When I worked with juveniles on probation, not all of them, but many of them came from fairly impoverished backgrounds. And the lack of awareness, the lack of healthy sustenance, just the basics, that, issue of being in constant flight mode. Certainly not knowing when that next meal will come from, all sorts of things. So we can surely talk about that. One question before we get into today's topic. I notice listeners in Dr. Eddy's background, she's in her office, and is an array of beautiful masks. They look like they're from a variety of cultures. Could you tell us a little bit about the meaning of those masks? They're beautiful.
Thank you. I would say probably in my 20s, I started either being gifted masks or traveling and picking them up on my own. And then my husband, who I met maybe 10 years later, also had masks from being in Korea and Italy. You might recognize some of those. And then when people saw that we both had a mask collection when we were living together, when we got married, people gave us masks for our wedding. So, and then we've collected a few others as we continue to travel.
My goodness, they are beautiful. And I remember I once did a retreat through Marion Woodman Foundation. And as part of the body intensive work we were doing, we each made a mask. And there's just something so profound about mask work and doing mask work with one's own mask made from one's own face, to be able to see that and put on all sorts of paint and colors. And it's so healing, those practices, aren't they? The creative practices.
Absolutely. And thank you for bringing that up because I come with a strong background as a dancer who trained in technique and what was called modern dance and has morphed into contemporary modern dance. But there was always, from the beginning, the room, even in a class that was called a dance class, for creation, for improvisation and or composition. And that's a big part of what I bring into, again, the dynamic embodiment style of somatic movement therapy. That not necessarily that people are dancing or making dances, but that their creative spirit and their creativity is invited into the healing process. And whatever form that takes is welcome as well. And I can't say that I've gotten the masks down in my sessions with people, but I can say that one of these is my face and another is from the Sandinista revolution. So was somebody very specific space as well. So we have two here that are from that kind of ritualization and functional use in real life.
Let's talk for a moment. I'm going off on another tangent, which I'm prone to do. I recall, just because I spoke about that body, body soul intensive that I did. I recall at that time in my career, I was a newbie, was brought up in a fairly straight-laced family. So being part of these creative practices, being asked to walk in my bare feet in mud and, put plaster on my face and engage in dances with other women with our arms around each other, I felt it felt very strange to me at first. I'm a very different person now. So the reason I say this is I can imagine that some of our listeners who may not even be aware of the power of dance therapy, they may not understand what somatic therapy is, they may not understand the healing power because they may not have experienced it. And certainly those first doses, if you don't grow up in that sort of creative, let's be in this organic space of healing and empowerment and feeling our bodies, being in our bodies, it may be quite a leap to understand how that could be healing. Again, I came from that place many moons ago, but have now come to a place where I get it. I'm a yoga teacher. I was doing yoga therapy, that sort of thing. So I get it, thank goodness, from the inside out. But for our listeners who may not, and even the person who wrote in with the TBI, the traumatic brain injury, they may be thinking, what is this about? You think dance and movement's going to be healing? Please explain.
So there are a lot of different modalities referred to there. So I'll kind of unpack it a little bit and just remind listeners that I wrote a book called Mindful Movement that also will elucidate or repeat some of what I'm saying. So if they want to either go deeper or just refresh in these definitions, they can find that information there.
Listeners, that will be in the show notes. Anything that Dr. Martha talks about will be in the show notes. So if you don't have a pen handy, don't worry, it'll be there for you to click.
Yeah, so it's called Mindful Movement, the Evolution of the Somatic Arts and Conscious Action. And I really thought long and hard about what I wanted to convey in that subtitle. And conscious action is not a term I hear very often for our field, but I'm proud of it because people will talk about conscious movement, but I think more people think about, I take action in my life than, necessarily like I step forward with my whole body. Those would be two ways to take action, but action is a more common term. And so conscious action is simply saying, I'm aware of myself as I do something. And that's what somatic awareness is all about. It's based in the word soma, which is a Greek word that distinguishes a body that can be a dead body from a body that is alive. So the soma is the living body, the body that feels itself. So that's the next thing I wanted to share, is that dance movement therapy, which is movement psychotherapy, and somatic movement therapy, and I will distinguish these two systems, and somatic psychology, all support people coming a little bit, to different degrees, at least a little bit, and then some a lot, into feeling their bodies, which is basically being aware that we have something called proprioception, that we literally can feel our body. So if you move your hands, that's a kinesthetic awareness. If you're in a position, even without moving, you can say, my hand is almost a fist, or open, or fisted, because you're feeling it. You can look at it and see that, but you can close your eyes and feel it too. So I actually encourage you to do that. Just like take a position with your hand, close your eyes. Can you say what it is? Take a different position. Can you picture it? Can you feel it? Can you feel a difference between the right and the left hand? What's different in terms of how close to your body, or far away, or up or down? Those are all different kinds of spatial awarenesses, but they're based in how folded our joints are or open they are, or also how much tension our muscles have. So one is registering sensation through the proprioceptors of our muscles, and the other is in our joints. This is information that we don't teach and people don't know about.
As you're speaking, I can't help but feel as though I am sinking into my own body a bit more, because just these simple practices, touching our fingertips, maybe one, by one with another digit. Yes, making that fist, opening it up. We can't really get into too much of a stressed place or an anxious place if we are focusing on the body. If we are putting our attention in this space, this body that we call home, and a home we often lose touch with from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep.
Mm. Yeah, when you were describing the various kinds of troubles, if you will, that we come into the world with, or into a day with, um, I want to connect the dots that someone who carries a lot of anxiety or has a very strong inner critic, a kind of self-judgmentalness, might not totally relax doing something like this, because they might be going, am I doing it right? What should I be doing? Da-da-da. And so the head, if it really take over with your head, you can still stay in a mind state that is less than optimal for healing. But if you can literally, and this is, I think, what you were saying so clearly, feel it as you do it, then your mind is occupied with sensation. And that can be very helpful, very, to really be caught up in the consciousness of the action, such that you're feeling your soma is alive and responsive. And that is all that matters, is what's happening in this present moment. So it's very much about presence and mindfulness in motion.
That is so beautiful, and it reminds me of yoga, where some people go and do a yoga class and they're worried about perfection, really creating that perfect pose. Yet, I tend to, when I practice, I close my eyes because we want to feel into that pose. We want to notice where the muscles are tight, where we can create some ease. And it is, even for those of us with very busy, busy minds, if you are immersed in a somatic practice in that way, whether it's dance or yoga, not focusing on the perfection, but focusing on feeling the body, that sort of sweet space. It's very healing, very, and I find it, and so this makes me weave back to the topic of the day, which really seems to be about cloudiness of thought, lack of focus caused by the TBI, but certainly something that we can often experience regardless of whether we've had a traumatic brain injury. We can get that sort of stress-induced, anxiety-induced, daily life-induced lack of focus and concentration, partly because we don't have it in the body. We aren't starting from that strong rooted place of knowing how the body is feeling. So could you talk to us about that, please, Dr. Eddy?
I wanted to add to your examples of what might bring a cloudy brain. Sometimes it can be as simple as like an overload of sugar too, like what we put in our
Mm.
systems. So a certain amount of sugar is used sometimes with children with or adults with attention deficit. Just a little bit of chocolate is known to help focus. But if we flood our system with a lot of sugar, it can just kind of cause a kind of wooziness even. And so that's just another piece of this pie, is that there are biochemical aspects of what we're doing all the time. I do want to, before I get into the traumatic brain injury, the TBI, I'd like to just speak to yoga for a second and just say that I had fun choosing where to put more information out in the world about this approach that I will share about TBIs, which is the model I created for dynamic embodiment of thought. And we're talking about clarifying thoughts. So it's an action plan. It's called OSO, and I will explain it in a bit. OSO is also the word for bear in Spanish, which I think is kind of wonderful. And I chose to write a second book together with a yoga therapist who is a graduate of dynamic embodiment somatic movement therapy and now a registered somatic movement therapist as well. And that book is Dynamic Embodiment of the Sun Salutation.
Mm.
And the reason I picked it was because the sun salutation is a flow. It's a sequence. And to me, it can be a ritual. Some people steer away from the word ritual for the same reason I think we were just talking about, like feet in the mud, arms around other people and dancing kind of seems maybe ritualistic. And if that, for some reason, based in our psyche, childhood, anything else is a cause of just discontent or fear, then the word ritual doesn't have to be used. It's a practice. It's just a sequence. It's something we can do together and repeat. And it's in repetition that our neuroplasticity comes into blossom, meaning our nervous system can get really shut down with something like a brain injury. It can be damaged. There can be lack of oxygen. There can be a real problem of the injury literally killing neurons. And yet there are always new pathways that we can find. And that's neuroplasticity. That's the ability to get the dendrites more active, to allow the ends of our nerves to find new roadways, so that if your pattern and habit had been to do this, no matter what it is, maybe you just drag your foot, or maybe you were really great at sport, but you want to be even better, and you feel stuck in a habit, or there's been an injury, whether it's a stroke or a birth trauma like cerebral palsy, or a traumatic brain injury, where often the part of the brain impacted is not always identified. If with any of those you want change, then I will share the OSO model, which is to acknowledge what has changed, to be with that anxiety, to be present with the anger, the loss, the grief, whatever is coming up emotionally and cognitively, the lack of cognition, the diminished memory from chemotherapy. I work with all of these kinds of conditions. And what are they? They are life conditions. They are moments in time that have the ability to shift and change through connecting to the body and emotions and thoughts, and just noticing where we are with that. That's the observation, the O in OSO. It can be self-observation, or it can be a reflection from an external source. Sometimes we're too caught up in our problems or our story to really see ourselves. And so people go to therapy, people come to a somatic movement session, whether it's a class, a group, or an individual session, and then get the opportunity to become more aware. We call that a witness of oneself in a certain way. We're able to witness a little bit from the outside where we are in the moment, and then feel it. And with that, then, for instance, in my role as a therapist or educator, I would want to support what's working well, because we got to where we got. So that is the S, is to support. But often people will go as a practitioner or in a method of fixing somebody, go straight to supporting what isn't working. Let me show you something new. And I train my therapists that are trained in dynamic embodiment to spend the time to withhold that caregiving instinct, whether it's words or touch or movement, and say, just be with the person, find out where they're at, let them tell their story, listen to their tone of voice, hear the rhythm of the movement of their voice, or watch them move, and truly be present as a witness. And when you're present as a witness, then there's this opportunity to notice what's working well, how whatever this person has done to cope is actually a helpful defense or a helpful next step, and to celebrate that and take time with it and build confidence around it. Then once there's a kind of, okay, we've done that, I'm ready for more, if the person feels ready for more, then we could also see what's in the shadow, what has not been tapped into as a resource, whether it's a part of the body or a way of thinking or self-care or heartfulness. What do we need to draw forward to be more at ease, to spend time with oneself, but also in this relationship with the somatic movement therapist, the dynamic embodiment practitioner, to really find that someone cares about you, and taking time to be with the vulnerability. Then the last phase is really play. And there's still an O, and that is to offer options. So that's where that creative force we were talking about before really comes in. It can be there from the beginning, but once you've kind of tried on a new behavior, you have to kind of, it's like buying a hat and then going out and wearing it in different settings and finding out what outfit it goes with, or how people respond to it, and whether it makes sense in the sun or whether it's better off for on a rainy day. I mean, you might have thought one thing, but it's actually not working. And so being able to really take time with just trying things on that you're learning newly, the support that you felt from the therapist through touch, the ideas in movement, whether it's about alignment or about quality of movement, like you've been doing that with so much effort. Can you do it with more ease, with more flow, with more breath support? So I'll stop there and just say what OSO is again. It's observing, whether self or other, supporting, and then offering yourself, or if you're the practitioner, options to someone else.
What a stunningly simple yet complex approach. And I say simple and complex because even though OSO sounds simple, we want to observe by self or others. We want support, what is working well, leaning into the strengths. And then we want, when the person is ready, to offer the options or have ourselves offer us the options. And we can see when we lay it out, particularly if we have a practitioner supporting us, creating this space, how we could over time really shift, gain more clarity, gain more ease. And I love that you use the word ease because for many people, underneath all of that stress, anxiety, pain, confusion, lack of clarity, lack of focus, is that loss of ease. It's such an important piece of it. And I'd love to take it back to the sun salutations because I too am a big believer in ritual. If we look at it as a soothing practice that we can repeat, that's all, have an evening ritual around tea or getting ready for bed or the ritual of laying out dinner plates. Yet, if we look at it in a somatic sense, for example, this will sound goofy, but every morning when I'm brushing my teeth, I do my teeth in a forward fold. And so I'm lengthening my back, I'm stretching my body, and at the same time, I have a ritual of doing all my blessings to people while I'm doing that. It's a very interesting practice. I just do it because it works for me, but it is a ritual and a really important starting place for my day. So for those who aren't comfortable with that term, you can, like Dr. Eddy said, you can call it whatever you want. But when we have meaningful rituals that make us feel better about ourselves, body, mind, and spirit, they can be really wonderful guideposts throughout the day. They can actually help with clarity, with in the morning honoring that morning fogginess, but also moving out of it. And they can also be, nice grounding places at lunch just to pause and have a ritual of 5-minute meditation or something like that. And then at night, having a ritual around getting ready for bed. And I think all of those rituals, so taking it back to sun salutation, for those who don't know, and I was on your website and I have seen your books and have, read aspects of them, and they're beautiful works. And the sun salutation, I think there's even a little video on it on your website. And as a yoga teacher, I agree, the sun salutation, it's almost as if it offers the body a complete round of waking up. Like it's going into every aspect of that being and saying, here, stretch out here, lengthen here, embrace this. So could you tell us why that particular ritual, that sequence?
Well, it's very straightforward, which is that it's probably the sequence I've been doing the longest in my life. I could go back to pliés maybe, but that doesn't have, as you say, the variety to just go up and down, getting ready for a jump is fun, but, so pliés are just knee bends, or almost squats, but done in a more balletic way, so you're keeping your body upright and light as you descend, which is no small feat, it's worth practicing also, and I'm proud that I still can do them. But with the sun salutation, and I've been thinking about it a lot with, prayer practices from other cultures as well, the Muslim numerous times a day, really folding and straightening, and the sun salutation, or whether people do a moon salutation, that that the idea of both folding and unfolding the spine and prostrating and feeling the earth and reaching up to the sky are deep practices of humans relating to our relationship to the planet. So that is, I think, why I love it so much. I personally need to also get more rotation into my day. And I love that I learned a Tibetan yoga, which was basically circling 9 times from different joints in the spine. Circumduction is the anatomical or kinesiological term for making a circle with the top of your head on the ceiling and then doing it from any vertebra or from the hip joints. So these are all wonderful practices, and yet there's another reason I chose the sun salutation. And again, it shows up in the subtitle of the book, which is Balancing the Chakras and Neuroendocrine System. Actually, it's pathways for balancing the chakras and the neuroendocrine system. So we talked a little bit about the nervous system and fogginess. But I think it's really important to note that our hormonal state, which I guess I referred to when I talked about sugar, because then insulin comes in and that overwhelm could be part of some fogginess. But also fogginess can come from overexertion from the adrenals and then just being exhausted.
Yes.
Right? And then maybe fogginess is from a lack of the thymus making T cells to fight off viruses. So just feeling kind of weak and not clear because you're busy fighting off viruses and you haven't stimulated your own um, antiviral system to be as active as it could be. Well, when you do the sun salutation from the perspective of dynamic embodiment, we're working with the spatial clarity of what we call counter tensions, which is from one of the influences of my work, which is called Laban movement analysis, where we work a lot with even imagining movement inside the sacred crystals, the geometric platonic solids, meaning the little tetrahedron and then the octahedron and then the cube, which most Western rooms, not an igloo, but
Mm-hmm.
Western rooms are like. Some are more oblong or rectangular, but we can really feel the corners. So you can see the corner where that mask is
Yes.
and descend to the other corner of the room. And then you can go up to that corner and down to this corner. So feeling that the space that we occupy is a support for our bodies is part of the work, just like feeling that's more architectural, but we can feel that with the sky and the earth as well. So I take those Laban principles of establishing tensegrity, which is biotensegrity, is these tensile forces through our fascial system and allowing them to support either our organs, our muscles, our glands. In this case, in working with the hormones, establishing these tensions, I believe, also creates a kind of resonance that starts to wake them up a bit. So you can tap, you can squeeze, you can make sound, but you can also just pull, like you're pulling a rubber band. That then anybody who plays a string instrument understands that you have to tighten the bow, tighten the strings to the right amount. And when we use our body with counter tension, we can tighten our inner cordic energies to stimulate the glands. So I'll stop there because it's a lot.
It is a lot and it's fascinating, yet what you're making me think of is in more ancient times, our ancestors may have been doing a lot of this naturally. And we, in post-industrial revolution, we are sitting in chairs, on couches, in cars, in buses, on planes, a lot. And our very recent ancestors were not doing that. They were naturally reaching into trees. They were reaching to the ground. They were stretching. They were moving. They were dancing. They were connecting hand to hand, dancing in circles, and had all of these rituals and daily practices by necessity, reaching into streams to try to get that fish, watching the clothes in the streams. A lot of the movement that you're talking about was a natural part of their life cycle from dawn to dusk. And it sounds as if much of what you are doing is asking people to, or offering people, methodology for getting their bodies back into an alive, aware state where, because truth be told, at least from my experience, the more I am in my body, the better I feel, the more attention I'm paying to it, the more in sync I am with it. And we think about it, as you're saying, even with sugar, right before we started the podcast, you got water with elderberry in it. And we were talking, I was saying how I would like water with cranberry juice in it, but most cranberry juice these days has added sugar, that we often aren't mindful because we're in a rush of what we're putting in our bodies, and we may not even be aware that that good drink we're drinking is really high in sugar, which is not good for the system. And there's no shame or blame here, but I think you're asking as you brought up sugar, which I really appreciate that you did, because we do want to be mindful, because everything that we put in our bodies, every movement, every action we are taking, every situation we are putting ourselves in, is going to affect the tenseness in the body, our ability to think clearly, our ability to feel really well in this beautiful container that is the home, the body. So you have made it very understandable. And just before we close, I know that I could talk to you for ages because you have so much wisdom. I know that you had said when it comes to specifically traumatic brain injury, because it is such a complicated issue, because as you said, there are times when somebody who has TBI, they can't identify the specific part of the brain that was affected. It's not like, other disorders. We can go right to that part of the brain and say, oh, the speech or area was affected here, Broca's area, this or that, whatever. And so you would maybe say for those who are suffering from a chronic illness or something like TBI, that there might not be a quick fix or a specific fix, but that one of the big ways to move forward is to embrace the OSO program as much as they can on their own. And if that isn't sufficient, to reach out to somebody who can help them move past the confined space that they are in, the confined space currently dictated by the illness and where they are with it.
Yes, that is really accurate. There are resources too that could be one-on-one to really be witnessed that can be so important. Sometimes just being able to tell your story and have someone watch your movement and reflect what they do see, whether it's your friend or a professional that's really skilled at this exact thing, is so helpful. So it's great to do self-awareness, totally wonderful and free. And a friend that's willing to be non-judgmental and caring and compassionate as they share their observations. Wonderful. A trained, registered somatic movement therapist or somatic movement educator is someone who can not only see you and maybe have language for reflecting that's quite sophisticated, but also have their own life experience of embodiment as a way to resource their own supports for you and in an embodied way. We believe a lot in transmission. So if you are seeking a practitioner and you don't vibe with them, they just make you uncomfortable, don't push through it. Find someone you feel comfortable with, because trust is actually a key part of the healing process. And that would be for a classroom teacher too, or a movement teacher.
Absolutely, that trust factor in all of our relationships, from romantic partner to friends to work to therapists of any sort to doctors, everything. And I do want to just offer this piece. You made me think of it. A dear friend of mine has an ailment and is having trouble walking. And I was doing a visit and noticed that he was getting up from his chair and immediately reaching for the wall
Mm.
and going from one frail position to another, which is not strengthening his muscles, but leading him into a jagged sort of weave. And so I was the observer. I'm not, trained physical therapist, but I said, I just want you to notice what I'm noticing here. And perhaps, if you'd like to hear this, maybe perhaps if you're able to stand and get a support, a cane or something right there to help you use your muscles and strengthen your muscles, and then walk rather than fling yourself to the wall, right? That might be that might be helpful. And he later texted me and said, "Thank you for caring. That really helped. I'm going to do that." And so sometimes when we are often when we are in our own habit, we don't see it. We're just doing the best we can to take that next step, literally or metaphorically. And so sometimes, as you say, a witness, especially if it's a very trusted person, whether it's a professional, who we've hired or a dear friend, we can really benefit from having somebody take that time to attune to us. There's so much magic in the power of caring, the power of attunement. And of course, you embody that, which is something I just already adore you. And I'm so grateful for you and for you sharing your time with us. Before we close, is there anything else you would like to share? You just have offered so much, Dr. Eddy.
I guess I would go back to my dancing. And even though I said I grew up in poverty, I was living in a neighborhood that was really poor. I mean, we're talking about torn down buildings, rubble, no trees, inner city, and yet full of amazing human beings and a lot of love and a lot of good parties and wonderful smells and foods. And my parents had the resources for me to go to dance classes. So I mentioned that I would go to these dance classes in the next neighborhood over and get to be creative as well as learn strategies for more flexibility, more balance, more range of motion, all of that. What I want to share is that that dancer still lives in me. And it's been one of the ways that I've maintained memory around what I learn about anatomy, kinesiology, physiology, health is by creating dance phrases. And so since about 1981, I've been teaching dance classes. So, we're going to be up to, we're at 43 years or something. And some of these phrases that I made up are still alive today. And I train teachers to do them. And they're all about self-care. Some are more rigorous and might involve like a sit up, and others are more just finding the breath and allowing for expansion and then exhale and just letting go of the weight of the head or letting your spine wriggle or whatever. So that's called body mind dancing. And I just want to invite people to feel that they could go to a body mind dancing class with me or with any of the 55 teachers around the world, online, in person. And the first class is free in most cases, so you can ask for that. I was really surprised. It turns out a New York Times dance reviewer was coming to my classes when they were really large, and I didn't even know she was there. And then she wrote an article, and then the classes blew up. There were like 363 students on Zoom. And she really got that it was a chance to recuperate, to be both tired if you're feeling tired, and then find movement that would, and we're guiding it. And I say we, because it could be any one of us. And in the teacher group, certified teachers of body mind dancing, we're taking a pulse on the mood. And there was often anxiety or isolation. And through this 1 hour class, people would say at the end of class, when we asked, "How are you feeling now?" They felt connected, maybe to themselves,
Mhm.
maybe to others. They felt joy that they hadn't felt in a week because it's the middle of COVID and they just lost a loved one, or they were in their grief and they were okay with it. So anyway, I wanted to invite people to body mind dancing. And then also, because we were talking, I was referring to chemotherapy, and I was invited in 1999. So we're on a 25th anniversary of the concept to design an exercise program for women with breast cancer. And it's called Moving for Life now. It started out as Moving on Aerobics because we, Annie, Dr. Allison Rosen and I, Annie Rosen, were researching, and the internet was happening in 99. So we could look, and we found that in Europe, they were working very differently with cancer than in the United States. My own mother had died from cancer and was told, just
I'm
rest.
sorry.
Yeah, I lost her when I was really young, 33, and she was 63. So definitely a transformative experience around death and dying in both good ways and very difficult ways. And yet this is my gift back to her. So Moving for Life is the new name of the last 20, well, maybe 12 years. And we have a DVD, which obviously can be streamed, but we have online classes as well. And as long as we possibly can, we've been trying to keep them free. That may not be possible forever because there's not as much support anymore for breast cancer programs. Susan G. Komen is no longer giving money for community programs. New York State is no longer giving money for community programs in breast health.
What a shame.
I
What a
know.
shame.
And we open the class now, so it's for anybody with a chronic disease or just getting older, creaky bones, wanting to dance for the first time in their lives. That is being funded by New York City discretionary funds of council members, but we have to pay it out in advance, and then they pay us back at the end of the year. So it's tough. It's tough running a nonprofit and running a system that's free, but people have been very generous, and we're happy to have it. So come when you can while it's free.
Well, and we will put out good energy that your coffers get filled from donations that you're well deserved because you have such a good cause and movement. We take our bodies for granted, yet moving these bodies, oiling the joints, lubricating, all of who we are. It's such a, we lose touch with it. And it is one of the core components of well-being and keeping ourselves well and healing when there's trauma in the body, when there dance, movement, it holds such at whatever level somebody can accomplish. One step forward, that's movement. That's a good thing. And last but not least, Dr. Eddy, we had started with the piece about poverty and had promised to circle back and just wanted to touch on that just for a moment. You were fortunate in your poverty to have had community. And I think that that is one of the things that can make poverty more bearable, less isolating. Not that it's ever good to be impoverished, but I do think that for those who are impoverished financially, but also socially, physically, psychologically, and all those realms, which often happens, especially if there's intergenerational transmission of violence. That I think is something that it's so important to remember that movement can help there. Dance classes can help there as they helped you because you are gathering community, even if it's a virtual community, you are able to see outside your small world of impoverishment. And not all impoverished people do have access to computers, to any form of resource that will get them this sort of support. But we can hope that it comes in the future in wide-reaching ways to allow those who are impoverished and isolated and hurting to be boosted up in the world.
Amen. That's beautifully stated. Thank you so much. People may have heard of social determinants of health, what we call upstream factors. So just up the stream, if industry is dropping pollutants and then we're drinking the water downstream, it's in the ecosystem. And so poverty is an upstream factor. It's something that just seeps into the body, and whether it's, again, fogginess from lack of food at all is a huge problem with children that I work with in schools around attention issues. If you don't have the right balance of healthy food, you can start to just get the jitters, and that can look like ADD or ADHD. You can get misdiagnosed, or it can actually foster a behavior pattern that is going to become part of a learning disability. So, and then that is borne out in all kinds of things. How are you, if you're not doing well at school, how do you progress further in your life to get a job? And then what kind of work do you take on? And is it within the system or not? Is it working for you? Are you feeling humbled or shamed by the dominant people, the class, the leadership? So all of these topics are so important that actually in my training program, we have something called the Socially Conscious Somatics Forum, where we just come forward with different discussion points. And it could be about poverty, it could be about bias, it could be about what it is to be fat and how we're treated in a fat body, and accepted or not accepted, or developing reactions to phobias, all kinds of topics like that. And it just, even if we're not solving them, and that solving them to me is social justice, when you actually change the law and change the policy. But if you're becoming conscious of it, we're doing social somatics, we're doing social change work, we're changing our thinking and our minds. And that feels very important to me.
That is absolutely beautiful. I'm grinning ear to ear because we're closing on a topic of movement. That when we can have healthy discussions, when we can listen to different perspectives and be curious and want to learn and want to grow and help other people grow, that is movement. Just where we started, it's all about movement and allowing ourselves and others the freedom to move. Yes. Oh, Dr. Eddy, thank you so much. Listeners, you can find Dr. Eddy's books and resources in the show notes. But, Dr. Eddy, where would you like our listeners to find you?
Well, it's pretty easy to just go to drmarthaeddy.com. So it's DR and then my name, Martha, and Eddy, EDDY.com. And then within that, if you go to sort of the community page, you'll see about 5 other websites I have. But the other one that we talked about a lot today is dynamicembodiment.org. And that's especially if you want to find the professional training. The calendar is the same on both of those. So if you ever forget it, just drmarthaeddy.com, you can find the classes that are just 1 hour. Some are free, some are, a donation. Others are $20, or you get them discounted if you take a few of them. And then we have workshops that are about 12 hours. And then we have longer kind of investments of time and body and attitude in order to become a professional in this field, whether it's through dance, coaching, and or movement therapy.
Well, thank you. And what better investment can we make than on this body, on this psyche, on this beautiful being that we call the self? So, thank you for your luminosity, Dr. Eddy. It has been such a joy, such a privilege, and thank you to our listeners. I so appreciate you and your support, and this is Imperfect Love.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanly.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Manly wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.